Elvis has left the building. Hello, everybody. Today is Saturday, March 1st, 2025. And yesterday, the Ocean Infinity ship tasked with carrying out the third seabed search for the missing Malaysian airliner MH370 left the search area and is sailing to the port of Fremantle, Australia, about 1,000 miles to the east. Less than a week after it started the scan on Sunday, February 23rd. What did they find and why are they leaving so soon? I'll explain it all right now. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Wise, aviation journalist and private pilot, back with another episode of Finding MH370. For more info and back episodes explaining the whole mystery, visit the show page at findingmh370.com. Last week, we talked about how Armada 7806 had launched 3 autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, in an area of the seabed that had already been searched twice, once by Fugro from 2014 to 2017, and then again by Ocean Infinity in 2018, all to no avail. Why look again? The short answer is that after a decade of analyzing and reanalyzing the evidence, investigators reached the conclusion that if all the data means what they think it does, then the plane pretty much has to be in this one area, fairly close to where the plane sent its last transmission at 019 Universal Time. Now, for a more detailed explanation of why the plane has to be near that place, check out episode 11 of season 1. Here's the link. But for present purposes, suffice to say that at the moment the plane had already run out of fuel several minutes before, and so had already lost energy and altitude. Then whoever was at the controls of the plane pushed the nose down into a very steep, almost vertical, directly vertical nosedive. Under this condition, it's going to hit the water in about a minute, as we discussed in episode 4 of season 2. So obviously, it's not going to have a long way to go. It's going to be pretty close to that final transmission. Now, remember that this Inmarsat data doesn't tell us exactly the spot where that final transmission was sent from, but it tells us how far the plane was from the satellite. And if you sum up all the possible locations of that distance, it makes an arc. And so what we're looking at is the final, or the 7th arc. The plane has to be near the 7th arc. But when they looked at all of those areas near the 7th arc, they didn't find the plane wreckage. So how can that be? How can you reconcile those irreconcilable facts? An idea that's been kicked around for a while, and which we talked about last week, is that maybe the last time they searched the area, the plane wreckage was there. They just didn't see it because it was, hidden behind a rock, or maybe it was down in a gully somewhere. And in fact, Australian officials took this idea very seriously. I'm going to read to you from an Australian government website that I'll link to in the show notes. It says, from 2 to 4 November 2016, experts in data processing, satellite communications, accident investigation, aircraft performance, flight operations, sonar data, acoustic data, and oceanography gathered in Canberra to reassess and validate existing evidence and to identify any new analysis that may assist in identifying the location of the missing aircraft. They agreed that the methodology and effectiveness of the underwater search meant that if an area had been searched, there was little to no chance that any aircraft debris had been missed. Little to no chance. So maybe there's hope? Well, not really. In 2022, Australia revisited the issue. Someone in the government had got excited about Richard Godfrey's ridiculous whisper claims. So they decided to revisit the seabed data near the area he was proposing, and they produced a report that really shows the issue quite clearly. There were really actually 2 issues. The first issue was that the imagery of the seabed contains certain, let's say, objects that were found sitting on the seabed. The report states, quote, GA, Geoscience Australia, identified 11 contacts. 8 were identified as most likely geological in nature, and 3 as possibly anthropogenic in nature. Anthropogenic means man-made, so what they're talking about is things like maybe a barrel that had gotten thrown off a ship, or some other, maybe a shipwreck, something like that, something that had wound up in the ocean that was man-made. Obviously, a piece of a plane is anthropogenic. So that could be included in that category. What if one of these anthropogenic objects was a piece of the plane? Well, they sought the advice of a man named Andrew Sherrill, and he explained why he didn't think that any such isolated object could be from MH370. On his website, Victor Ionello has this. He writes, Andy Sherrill is an experienced ocean engineer who has conducted deep water search and salvage operations for a number of missions. He was a key member of the team that reviewed the sonar data for the subsea searches for MH370 that were conducted by the ATSB and Ocean Infinity. And he was also part of a team that identified the debris field for Air France 447 off the coast of Brazil, as well as part of the team that found Argentina's ARA San Juan submarine. And he graciously offered these comments as to why many of the MH370 promising contacts were never investigated further. Quote, typically, if there were small isolated objects that appeared to be man-made and marked as a target, but nothing else was of interest within several kilometers, then we did not investigate further. We certainly took into account if the debris field did not look like Air France 447 or any others. However, there still needed to be enough debris, at least a fair amount of the aircraft, to warrant further investigation. Sure, a small part of the plane could have drifted and sunk, but we were looking for the main field. A decision was made to focus on finding the main field of debris, not just one small piece. And likely all of these, quote, potentially man-made, unquote, contacts are from passing vehicles, ships, in other words, given that there was no associated debris within several kilometers. Having said that, there is always a chance that a tagged contact could be from MH370, but based on our assessment, the time it took to investigate each of these small contacts was not worth taking versus searching new areas. So the idea is that if you have one isolated object on the seafloor, yes, maybe the plane crashed somewhere, like maybe it fell off before the plane hit the water and sank all by itself, or it somehow, like after the plane impacted the ocean, maybe some pieces got carried further away because of currents or whatever. But it just seems very, very unlikely, let's say. Okay, so that's the issue of an isolated piece of ambiguous identity. The other issue is, what if there's a gap in the imagery and the plane's main body of wreckage is in that gap? In the this 2022 report, they looked at the data gaps with a chart that looks like this. You can see that there are various kinds of data gaps, or what they call data holidays. These are places where either the swaths of the past, each successive swath didn't line up, or the equipment malfunctioned. And these data holidays look like this. You see a long, thin purple line, and then there's little bleeps and bloops. It would have been really unlucky for the wreckage to have just by chance have aligned itself right inside one of those little gaps. Then you have areas like on the slope of this little underwater hill where the sonar data is perfectly good, but you've got the problem that maybe there's shadows or crevices, boulders that make it harder to interpret what you're seeing, or maybe they're hiding the wreckage in shadows. But as you can see, these areas are really quite small. The chances of a plane being just in that one particular spot is also really tiny. So what Ocean Infinity has done over the last week is go back and look at these areas where there's any uncertainty at all, because that's basically the only possibility they can think of. Like the plane has to be there somehow. So if we look at where the surface vessel has been sailing back and forth over the last week, you see these zigs and zags that look pretty random at first. But when you line them up with the previously recorded seabed data, it sort of starts to make sense. It seems like Armada 7806 is deploying these AUVs mostly along steepish slopes and underwater ridgelines where the terrain is roughest and where there would be the greatest hope that the wreckage is there, but you missed it. So frankly, if you compare the planned search area to the vessel tracks, it seems they might well have pretty much covered most or all of the seabed region that had been scanned before. And so now they're leaving. Does that mean that they're finished? After all, they spent 9 days traveling from Mauritius to get to the search area. They only searched for about 5 days. And now they're sailing to Fremantle, which takes 4.5 days. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to come all this way and search for such a short amount of time. It doesn't seem very efficient. Well, a friend of the podcast named David Byers reached out to Kevin Rupp, who's been collecting all this data and posting it online. And he asked Rupp, this is what he asked him, would it always have been planned for 7806 to be at sea for about 4 weeks and resupply in Fremantle? And Rupp answered, yes. Union contracts usually stipulate crew changes every 4 weeks. Sometimes this is waived, but almost always 4 weeks. That's what Seabed Constructor did in 2018. And Rupp passed along this image showing Ocean Constructor's path during the 2018 search. And you can see that indeed about every month or so, it went back to Perth. Perth and Fremantle kind of being the same thing we're talking about. Now, Perth is a lot closer to the search area than Mauritius. So if the ship does wind up carrying out an extended search, it will be able to stay on station a lot longer, even if it does have to go back and forth to Perth/Fremantle at the end of every month. The ship is due to arrive in Fremantle on March 5th. 4 days from now, it will probably turn around pretty quickly with whatever supplies, equipment, new crew, etc., and head back out to the search area. I'm planning to have more about that in the next installment, as well as more of an explanation of the search beyond the previous scanned area and what the logic is behind that. Really looking forward to that episode. For more info and free newsletter, check out the show page at findingmh370.com. If you want to support the coverage, you can sign up for a paid subscription there or a paid membership here. Both deeply appreciated. For now, this is Jeff Wise. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.